Hi, I'm happy to welcome you on our online recording about news and trends in EB-5 program in 2023. Today, we're going to discuss the number of new applicants after the reform of the EB-5 program, the capacity of USCIS in sense of adjudicating petitions, processing time, trends in rural projects, sustainment period, and more. My name is Varvara Rutyntseva. I'm with Second Wind EB-5, our company based outside of the US, and we're helping to promote the EB-5 program and the EB-5 projects outside of US. Today, I'm happy to do this update with Ahmed Khan, who is Vice President of Regional Center EB-5 Affiliated Network. Ahmed, thank you so much for joining me today for this short update.
Thanks, Varvara. It's great to be here. And as Varvara mentioned, my name is Ahmed. I am the Vice President of EB-5 AN, or Affiliated Network. We are one of the nation's top regional centers in terms of regional centers that we operate, as well as projects that are on the market. So happy to be here and excited to talk more about the changes in EB-5. Very exciting.
Great. Thank you. So let's move forward with the update. Here on this slide, you can see actually the number of petitions filed starting from April 2002. And you can see clearly that there is an increase of the number of petitions filed. Ahmed, what do you see on your side? What's happening with the investors? Is it the maximum we're going to see in the following few years, or things would continue to grow in sense of applications?
Yeah, absolutely. So the RIA, the Reform and Integrity Act for EB-5 really just kind of hit a reset button on the entire program. And what that did was create an opportunity for new investors, right? Basically, the program made a lot of changes that were very necessary, but it also gave investors an opportunity to go into projects fresh with no line behind them. They would become the first investors into the new program. So we saw that demand hit really towards the end of last year. The first projects came to market. So previous projects refiled their applications with the USCIS, and new projects came to market under the new rules. And since the beginning of this year, the demand has risen basically steadily. We've seen a lot of people taking advantage of the new rules, taking advantage of the program. There's definitely a little bit of a longer cycle, right? $800,000 is not a small amount of money, and most projects are going to be asking for that amount. So it definitely takes a little bit longer to go through the sourcing pattern and make sure that everything is correct for the filing, but we haven't seen demand change over the last year. So I would expect, at least for the next couple of years, while we're still in this initial kind of phase of the RIA, to continue to see this demand. I don't think that it's going to slow down. So investors should really be looking to take advantage while they can, because we've seen it before. EB-5 fills up very quickly. It's one of the most popular programs to move to the United States from outside the world, from other parts of the world. So this is as good a time as any to get into the program, and I think investors are taking advantage of that.
But what are the main changes which happen in EB-5 reform, which you think are actually positive for investors?
Yeah, so the big change obviously is the oversight and compliance factor, right? So before, you didn't have a lot of transparency and you couldn't see kind of behind the curtain of everything that was going on. What was the government really doing to make sure that investors felt very safe and comfortable with their investment? Now we're seeing a lot of that, right? So there's integrity funds, there's a lot of oversight by USCIS, and there's also now the added component that you have to comply with all the SEC regulations and things like that. So just the amount of work that goes into run a regional center and to make sure that these projects are not just viable from an economic perspective, but also they're going to provide comfort to the investors that they're being run the correct way, that everything is transparent, that they can see behind the curtain, that they can see what's going on the back end. That's huge. And I think investors feel a lot more comfortable than ever before investing. The second thing is obviously the set-asides, right? So this creates kind of a reserved category for investors and creates almost like mini tranches for each individual country of chargeability. So if you're from, let's say you're from Italy, or you're from Brazil, or you're from these countries that do not have a lot of EB-5 applicants, you now know that you've got a reserved visa for you in one of these 3 categories that you could apply for. And because of the low numbers from most countries outside of the 2 big ones, which are always India and China, you have a really good shot of getting a green card very quickly, more quickly than before. And that brings me to kind of my third point, which is priority processing, right? Sorry, I know there's a lot of changes, but priority processing, which the rural category has gotten what's called priority processing. Does that mean you're going to get a green card in 3 months? No. But does it mean that you're going to be looked at very quickly? It seems like that's been the case. It looks like USCIS has been giving special attention to rural project applications, both on the project side and on the investor side. So we're starting to see more adjudications than we have in previous years, which is always a good sign.
Yeah, and actually here we're moving to the next slide where we can see the number of petitions which USCIS reviewed during the last 5 quarters. And we can see that the number of petitions they went through actually increased, which is positive sign, of course, and give us the hope of better processing time in the nearest future. Yeah. What do you see on your side, like for your regional center? Who is getting approvals now? When did they file?
Yeah, we're starting to see approvals coming in from 2019, which is, I know, still a long time ago. It's about 4 years ago. But we have to remember that since COVID, the EB-5 program has more or less been dormant. Yeah, USCIS was really not doing its job. They were not picking up applications, and it had slowed down to almost nothing in 2021 and 2022, early parts of 2022. The good thing about the RIA is it was Congress, right? The government actually stepped in and said, USCIS, you have to do this. You have to do better, and we're going to be checking on you to make sure that you're doing better. And that's what's, I think, urged USCIS to start pushing these applications out. So we're starting to see some of the older applications from like 2018, 2019 that were basically just sitting and not moving. And we're also seeing new applications that were filed after the RIA, which is, kind of surprising that they're going after both. They should be doing the first ones earlier, but yeah. This is the world we live in, right? So definitely the government pushing USCIS has made a difference. And I think progress is the only thing we can expect from USCIS. So very happy to see that we're starting to see movement. And as you can see, towards the end of this past year, we're seeing a lot more numbers than we have in previous years, which is great.
Yeah, and I think here again, it was to notice that the biggest number of applicants reach EB-5 program. So we're actually in 2019 for the last a few years. So once they kind of finished with application from 2019, there are not so many to work on. Exactly.
And that's it's kind of an interesting, so there's layers to it, right? If we're talking about non-Indian and non-Chinese applicants, you're right. Basically, within the next year or two, we should be clearing most of the queue of people who filed in 2019. But for India and China, because they're not current really up to that point, we're only now starting to dig into the Indian backlog, and we're now digging into kind of like 2017, 2016 Chinese backlog, which is really good news. Why? Because ultimately, although we've got about 3,200 visas approved every year for the reserved categories, we still have the majority, the 6,800 reserved for the unreserved category, right? That still goes to them. Yeah. And that means because there's no new applications really coming into those categories, that over the next 3 or 4 years, we should see that queue completely cleaned out. And that will open up the entire 10,000 visas again for everyone, basically, in the reserved categories and otherwise. So it's a very interesting time, and it's definitely moving. It's moving, but it's not perfect.
So talking about not perfect, we didn't show here on this slide, but we must know that the denial rate in I-5 to 6 applications like crazy high the last few quarters. What is your explanation? What is happening, and why there is such a high level of denials in the last year?
Yeah, it's very interesting. We personally did not have many denials at all. I mean, we had 0 denials really from a project perspective, and most of the investors that we work with also received approvals or are still pending. What I've heard from other folks and other, players in the industry is that there's a lot of people who withdrew their applications. And unfortunately, USCIS doesn't track withdrawals. So they count a withdrawal as a denial. So at least some portion of that number is still just withdrawals. But it's too large of a number to be all withdrawals. And so, I'm very interested to know what were some of these smaller projects. I think people trying to take advantage of the pockets during the rule changes and all the different rules that came about in the last 2 years. We saw that almost all of 2021 was like kind of like one rule, then another rule, then a third rule, a different amount and a higher amount, 900K, then it was 500K. So all those changes, I think, just led to a lot of confusion, and some people may have tried to take advantage of it and file applications very quickly, not realizing what they were doing, and ultimately USCIS came back to reject them. Some of it may be something else, but I think for the most part we're looking at withdrawals, and probably just poor judgment in terms of finding the right immigration attorney usually leads to most of these issues.
Yeah, you have actually both. You have to have both, like very experienced and good professional parts of the program, immigration lawyer and project. If you covered both, then the chances of getting a green card are pretty high with EB-5 program. It's actually very interesting because this year in GAO report, they officially stated that USCIS does not track the reasons for denials of their applications. So it's not like we don't know, USCIS doesn't know what was the main reason for the denials. And this is strange, but still that's what we have. They promised to improve it, right? So hopefully we will have more transparency on this part in the nearest future. And now that's a great slide with the current processing time, which we took from USCIS website a few days ago. What would be your comment here?
Yeah, and I think a lot of these processing times, first of all, it's for the 526, which is pre-RIA, and it seems like unfortunately they're not crazy, but again, these are mostly applying because of the vast volume of Indian cases in the all other areas. That's mostly going to apply to most Indian cases. And the reason for that is they're backlogged. So USCIS doesn't do a first in, first out system when they're looking at applications. They basically wait until someone's application is going to be current, and then they pick it up. Now, if you're not from India or China, and for some people in Vietnam, that doesn't really apply to you. Pretty much as soon as your application goes in, USCIS should be picking it up. So from what I hear, most people are talking about 24 to somewhere between 24 to 36 months when they filed previous. Now, obviously, there's kind of that in the middle, there was a little bit of a stoppage. And so we're seeing even longer than that. Some people are still waiting for that 2019 backlog to get cleared. But yeah, unfortunately, China is the one that suffers the most. And then I think a lot of these cases are Indian that are stating 50 months or longer.
I think it would be fair to say here that this number actually reflects the previous application, which actually experienced COVID and technical stop of the program, which was almost for a year when USCIS didn't work on the petitions. So this all kind of in these numbers. And for the new petitions, again, based on the previous slides on how USCIS working and how they increasing the number of petitions they review each quarter, we hope the processing times would be much faster. Now, I just wanted to talk a bit about the different types of EB-5 projects which are out there. In the past, it was simple EB-5 direct and EB-5 regional center. With the new reform and new rules, we have a bit more complications in the sense of what kind of projects are there. And here we have, again, EB-5 direct. That's the project where you have just one investor. If you have two investors in one project who want to get the green card through EB-5 program, then they must have a regional center involved. That's clear. That wasn't before like this. Now it's the way it is. And the regional center project can be for different types. Ahmed, would you cover this?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big changes, obviously, was how a TEA or targeted employment area is calculated, right? So gone are the days where you could be in the middle of Manhattan and that still is a targeted employment area. It's much more strict much more narrow. And then basically USCIS or the government really came in and defined 3 different areas that would basically cover this. Now, 2 of them are actually targeted employment areas. The third one is actually infrastructure. So it's not a true TEA. It's really speaking to if you're doing an infrastructure project that's going to benefit the country as a whole. Think national railways, national airports, things like that could work. It's going to be very difficult to see EB-5 projects like that. But the TEA rural and TEA high unemployment, these are really the ones that people have been targeting. You still have the standard non-TEA. This would be basically any urban center, right? So something that doesn't qualify for high unemployment numbers or outside of a metro city. Rural is literally the opposite of that. It has to be outside of a major city, or it needs to be in a county with a population of less than 20,000 people. So either one of those ways can qualify you. And the good thing about rural is, once you get qualified, it's typically pretty easy to stay rural for at least 5 years or so, because that's how often the census is run. And usually the data doesn't change that quickly. And then the last one is the high unemployment, which this is going to look very similar to the previous definition of high unemployment. The difference now is instead of using census tracts pretty much as far as you can touch, you can only use the census tracts around the project, immediately around the project, to see if it's going to qualify. So this will also look like close to a city, but not inside the city boundaries. And there's very few of these that really qualify and have good projects. So this is the new age, and kind of like you mentioned, these are the 4 different categories that people can be looking into. The vast majority of regional center projects are going to fall into the TEA rural or the TEA high unemployment. This is going to be where most projects are going to be looking to have their projects. Why? Because they have the largest set aside visas. We see the 20% and the 10% numbers. So this is where there's an opportunity. There's no grandfather of previous applicants into these categories. So these are wide open until they get filled up.
And talking about processing time on the previous slide, we actually saw current information on USCIS. It does not provide you information on the different type of projects. It's just available for EB-5 investors in general. Here on this slide, you can see the processing time, which was included in Integrity and Reform Act of 2022. And the wording there was that when it was signed in March 2022, that USCIS has 1 year to review their governmental fees in order to increase them to be able to review the petitions in the time which is indicated on this slide. It's 240 days for the standard project and 120 days for all TA projects. To be honest, when they announced this, I was very skeptical because all the investors
these would be record times, right?
In 2019, still been waiting, and now they're saying like 120 days.
Yeah, 4 months.
Actually, and they announced new governmental fees in the March of 2023, which was actually pretty surprising, but they plan to increase governmental fees for number of petitions, not only for EB-5 investors, and increase is pretty high. Here actually on this slide you can see planned increase for EB-5 petitions. So this initiative had a lot of negative feedback, and they postponed the introducing of new fees till spring of 2024. So we're not sure if the amounts would be like as they stated before, or it would be less or more, but still seems like governmental fees would be definitely higher next year. And if this happens and they clear the line of investors which is pending, then there is a chance that like in 2025, that would be the real processing time. Ahmed, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some optimism in the industry right now because we're not seeing 120 days, but there have been some cases that have been approved in as little as 3 months, which is kind of crazy to see. Is that normal?
I heard 1 month.
1 month for one. So here's what's interesting, and USCIS maybe finally got someone who understands how to organize their caseload, but Though the way that the new law was written and the way that kind of the lawmakers envisioned this program was that you would first file for a project, similar to the 924 previously, which was the exemplar. You got a 956F, and that basically approves the project. And then the investors, the adjudicators are just looking at their source of funds. They've already approved the project. They don't even need to see the project documents every single time. They just need to see the source of funds and the immigration pieces for the investor to make sure that they're approvable. So for projects that already have their 956F approval, we're starting to see pretty rapid, especially on the rural project side, rapid adjudications for the investors. So what does this mean? If you are going into a project that's maybe 9 months old and it already has a 956F approval, you could put your application in and within 1 month in some cases, or even as little as 6 months, see an approval. Why? They're putting you into the line with the project that's already approved, and they're picking up your case very quickly and just looking at the source of funds. So this is kind of it's very interesting, and it's pretty much we've seen it across a few different regional center projects, this trend. So I think it's something that's actually positive and something that we can rely on. So one of the things that obviously is a big advantage is if there's a project open that has 956F approval and there's still slots available, there's a big advantage to investors investing into that project and expecting to see an approval sooner.
Yeah, but here we also have to note here that majority of the regional centers, at least till now, this may change in the future, they file the project petition first, and basically they starting to market the project outside of US, and investors filing their petitions within the following few months. So the project is already subscribed by the time the project petition is approved. So it's kind of tricky to find a project where you have project form approved. It's not easy. And again, like you have to prioritize what is more important for you, to have faster approval of your petition or to have higher chances of getting your green card and investment back. Again, it depends very much on the projects, and you just have to prioritize for yourself. And here also I would like to mention this set-aside visas. There is a lot of I would say noise about set-aside visas, but actually this have meaning only for Indians and Chinese investors. So if you're outside of these countries, you probably should not worry so much about these set-aside visas. But priority processing, this is different. And here we kind of have a separate column in this table to show that there is a different things now. The EB-5 processing time, and again, it's different. It's different for the standard projects and for TA projects. Priority processing and set-aside visas. These whole different things, and they do have effect on the speed with which your project petition is approved and with which your petitions are approved. And the priority processing, as Ahmed already mentioned, seems to be working. That's what we hear and see from the different sources. But again, you have to look yourself and evaluate what is the project on the market and what is better for you to invest in the rural and get faster processing time, or go for the other type of projects.
Exactly. Yeah, I think ultimately it should be a holistic approach. You're not looking at just one thing. You're not just, looking at, the 956F is approved, let me just blindly go into this project. Because the 956F is just looking at the immigration aspects of it, no financial aspects of it whatsoever. So, Varvara, you're 100% right. I mean, you should be looking at everything in the project and then really asking yourself and your family, what is our priority? Do we have a couple of years to basically wrap up our affairs overseas before we make the final move to the United States? Or our children maybe a little bit younger, we're not worried about college and things like that starting right away. These are things that all families should be considering, because often we'll see this, and we have projects like this too, where high unemployment projects can offer maybe even better terms financially than rural projects, whether it's the earlier return of capital or if it's a higher rate of return. So these are things that everyone should be considering when they're looking at these projects, because it's not just rural or high unemployment, especially for people outside of India and China. You're 100% correct.
And here, actually, Ahmed kind of went through these points already while he was discussing the process of review for different petitions. But that was update which USCIS published in July 2023 on the way how they're going to work with petitions. And seems they actually doing what they said.
Well, they say. Yeah.
Yeah, at least on this occasion. So the order is opposite. So they start from the petitions, which is the third line. After that, they're going to the second, and as the last, they go to the first one. So Ahmed, I think you already covered this, but just a few words.
Yeah, I mean, I think, throw caution to the wind whenever you're trying to guess what USCIS is really doing behind closed doors. But they did come out and actively say that this is how they're basically reviewing applications. So they created kind of a hierarchy. And it's kind of in line with what we've been seeing, right? Basically, applications that have been sitting for a long time, basically, and don't have a priority date that is coming up, they're still probably going to remain in that way until a priority date becomes either soon, and this is something that you can look at from chart B, basically, on the visa bulletin. So if you look at chart A, that will tell you who's current, but chart B is where USCIS really kind of plays
Can
their
we
hand.
simplify it and say that for Indians and Chinese, this is important, for rest of the world?
For the rest of the world, it's not. Exactly. And I think that's actually probably the best way to look at it is if you're from India and China, you're paying very close attention to both the visa bulletin and your priority date, really. But if you're from
you set up a separate consultation with immigration lawyer to discuss this topic to understand it.
Absolutely. And if you're not from India or China, really the way that we're seeing it, if you're filing an application now, you're going to be looked at very quickly, especially if you're in the rural side. But even on the high unemployment TEA side, we've been seeing a lot of movement from USCIS for post-RIA applications. So if you're basically, not from India and China, which are always kind of the big filers, you're in a very, very good position to get your green card much quicker. I would say even, kind of optimistically speaking, within the first 2 years of filing. That we've seen that happen quite a few times over the last few months, which is really, really good to see.
So another new update from USCIS, which kind of changing slightly the way how the project are structured and marketed in EB-5 world, and this is sustainment period. Ahmed?
Yep. This is a
in
fun
simple
one.
words.
This is a fun one. So look, let's talk about the old rule. The old rule was that you would wait however long to get your green card. Let's say it took 3 years. For whatever reason, you applied, you got your green card in your hand. Then after 2 years, you could basically file for the permanent green card, where you could remove the conditions. Until you file that second application, which would probably take about 5 years or maybe even longer, you had to keep the money invested. The RIA basically had a line in there that said 2 years. 2 years is all you need. And USCIS came out and said that they interpret that as 2 years from when your money goes into a project and is used basically for the construction or for the job creation purpose. You're now okay to take the money out. So what they essentially did was say, put your money in, 2 years, take it out, you're good to go. Investors kind of rushed and said, okay, this means that every project is going to pay back in 2 years. And that's just not the reality. There's one big complication here that I'll talk about. And then there's a lot of other if you think about it, it's common sense, right? The first one is money has to be used for construction for at least 2 years to even qualify for the job creation part of an EB-5. And that is the most important part to get your permanent green card. You have to create the jobs, and the jobs have to exist for at least 2 years. So the money has to remain in there for at least 2 years to even get to that point. Then for a project to pay the money back, we're talking about a project that only takes 2 years to build. Immediately after it's built, it's ready for sale. If it's a hotel, it's 100% booked. If it's an apartment building, it's 100% leased. Like all it has to be a perfect situation, and then they can pay you back maybe just a few months later. So projects like that just don't exist in reality. You might start seeing some projects out there that are in the 3 to 4 year period. In fact, we just launched one that is that, and that would be as fast as you get. But even that comes with a certain level of risk because it has to be a pre-construction project, right? The construction can't be started so that you can take advantage of the full 2 years and still be able to get the money back in the third year or the fourth year once the building is stabilized or fully rented or fully leased, et cetera. So without getting too complicated, I think there's two big takeaways. One, this is not a rule yet. This is USCIS basically coming out and saying, this is how we see this. I've already heard murmurs of people who are, thinking about challenging this. We are in the middle. We feel pretty good that this is obviously a great thing for investors, and it does get rid of redeployment almost completely. Yeah. Right. The big thing here is if a project is completed even as quickly as 2.5 years and they pay the money back, you can get the money back. It doesn't have to be redeployed. So that's one really, really big advantage for investors. But the second thing that everyone needs to keep in mind is, look, it's still, projects are not purely built on immigration grounds. In the past, it has lined up nicely where most projects take about 5 years to be built and stabilized, and the immigration process takes 5 years as well. The good projects that are going to be safer for investors are still probably going to fall into that line. So investors should be very careful when they're going towards shorter term projects. And we have one, but we know that there are certain risks that you have to be okay with taking. And, maybe they're okay, but you have to be aware of them before you make that decision and make that investment.
Here also, I would like to outline that investors who invested before March 2022, they still in the process with the old rules. So they have to file their 829 petition before they can get their money back. That's the first one. The second one is, again, just the wording of the second option, that first, the money have to be available to the project. When investor funds, then they normally invest to NCE, and NCE release these funds at some point. And I've seen, even like myself, that in some cases this process took almost a year, and you never know how long it's going to take. Again, the different projects have different structure, but that's what may happen. And the second one, that money can be released when all jobs are created. So these two make this process a bit like unpredictable, let's put it in this way, and count just for 2 years to cover all this. That would be too risky, that's for sure. As Ahmed said, 3-4 years, maybe.
Yeah, and even then, it's pre-construction, usually pre-funding. There's definitely, you're giving something up to get something. There's no such thing as a free lunch, as we say in America. So if you're going to get some kind of benefit, maybe a higher return or maybe a shorter return period for the investment, you're going to be giving something up. You can't have a perfect project with almost no risk involved and kind of the normal guarantees that are given by regional centers. Not guarantee a return of money, but repayment options and things like that. It's going to be tough. So I would just caution investors. It's not impossible to find a good project that will have lower sustainment periods, but you just know that, well, what is the catch? You're going to be giving something up, and sometimes that's okay. Like you said, some investors' priorities is, okay, I'm okay with taking a little bit of more of a risk with my money. I'm okay with that because I have other things that I need to do with that money. So I'm willing to put it in and kind of see what happens. For others, they're only worried about safety of capital. And in those situations, I would say probably stick to the more traditional projects because they're going to keep your money a lot safer. Visa
allocation and how the numbers looks for next year. Again, positive notes here.
Yep. Yeah, it definitely looks like this year, USCIS, well, it's not USCIS anymore. Now we're talking about the Department of State, the consulates abroad. They were really starting to process these after being pretty dormant again for like I would say 2 to 3 years where they really weren't doing much. I mean, even in 2019, we had started to see the slowdown of consulates issuing EB-5 visas. But then this year they basically ramped up. We definitely saw a huge increase in number. Obviously, we're seeing 23.6%, thousands of visas being issued. And this is important because, again, this is working to clear the prior backlog. And we need to clear that in the next few years so that we can go back to having 10,000 visas available for new applicants. So this is super, super heartening, not just because we're seeing a higher number of visas actually being issued, but then the second point here, which is that we've got rollover visas going into the next year. And we don't have to get into, how all that works because it gets more complicated, but just know that we're going to have kind of a record number of visas available next year to be issued. So if the Department of State and the consulates continue to do their job, we're going to get through a lot of the visa numbers that have been backlogged for a while and hopefully see a lot of positive movement for EB-5 investors, both from previous times, but also this is going to benefit new investors because they're going to see more visas opening up for them as well.
Yeah, actually, I would also mention that on this slide, we see EB-5 visas issued, but the total number of EB-5 cases is actually visas issued and change of status, which happening in the US. So the information about how many people went through change of status road actually is going to be available somewhere in the beginning of next year. But talking about the change of status, Ahmed, would you say a few words about the new rule, which was presented in 2022 as well, of a possibility of concurrent filing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a great advantage as well.
It is for investors who are already in the United States, right? So concurrent filing basically allowed investors who are already in the United States to file an adjustment of status. What this the timing doesn't actually change. I think there's a common misconception that I'm going to get my green card sooner if I file, adjustment of status versus waiting at the consulates abroad. For the most part, that's actually not true. It takes about the same amount of time. The difference is you get to stay in the United States while you're waiting for the green card to be issued. So this was a huge benefit to students, to workers at companies who are already based here in the United States, or people here who are here on other visa types. Maybe they were here on an E2 or an E3 or some other type of visa type, even diplomatic visa types that were able to basically take advantage of this new rule, file an adjustment of status. And although they're still going to be waiting, that 2 to 3 years maybe for the green card to arrive in their hand, they might be approved sooner, but it still takes that long to actually get to your hand. They basically get a work permit and they get a travel permit to live, work, and even travel in the United States. What we also saw were people starting to kind of come to the US on a visitor visa and then try to adjust that way. I'll just say you should be talking to an immigration attorney before you think about that. There are circumstances where that is possible, right? Where there's a change in circumstances. But there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. And I would heavily advise to speak with an immigration attorney before making any kind of decision like that, because it has some pretty serious implications on your family's ability to ever immigrate to the United States. So yeah, that's a possibility, but definitely something that
it's not as straightforward as you may wish.
Exactly. Yep.
So to sum up, I think one of the biggest changes, what we've seen in the last year is actually what is happening with rural projects. And here again, you have to look at your own priorities and decide what is more important for you, or just try to find the perfect project for yourself. But we see faster processing times, which is good. The next year, we're going to have the highest number of EB-5 visas available, which is great. They're becoming more predictable than it used to be, which is a great advantage as well. That would be my summary. Ahmed, what is your summary for the trends?
I agree with you. I mean, for those of us who have been in this industry for 10 years or longer, we've seen this before. This is what EB-5 used to look like, where it was very much predictable. You had the government actually doing its job. I mean, believe it or not, back in like 2008, 2009, 526s were being approved in 6 months. So it isn't outlandish for us to get back to that kind of level. There's only, 10,000 visas available per year, which is really about 3,500, 4,000 applications per year. That's not a huge number for USCIS to be able to get through. So a lot of what this year has been kind of fixing the issues of the last 3 years. But I think we're starting to see over the hill a little bit and starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel, where we're starting to see a little bit more normalcy. We're starting to be able to predict patterns. And I think in the future, it's going to get even better with a little bit of time. And it's probably going to be as good a time as any to invest in EB-5 before, who knows, maybe the amount will go back up again in 2027. So got to take advantage while it's still available for the next 3 years.
Thank you, Ahmed. And I probably should have mentioned it in the beginning. This recording for the people who already know something about EB-5, so who are not new to EB-5 world. So if you're just starting to learn about EB-5, you went through this recording, and there are some points which you just didn't get, please check our previous videos on the YouTube channel. Just set up a consultation and ask all your questions. That probably would be the fastest and the easiest way. Ahmed, thank you so much for your time and your overview of what happened with EB-5 in the last few years.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And it was always great having insightful conversation with you about all the different changes that we've had over the last 2 years now.
Thank you. Guys, I hope it was interesting to go with us through the updates and news. And if you want to learn more about EB-5, please check our previous videos, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.